The Pacific War was a long and brutal conflict between the United States and its allies against the Japanese Empire. The U.S. entered World War II after the first hostilities in the East. Even before the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the United States had already suffered losses in 1937 when the Japanese attacked the Yangtze River gunboat USS Panay. That incident resulted in the deaths of 2 American sailors and serious injuries to 11 men and a civilian passenger. There was concern the event could trigger a war. Tokyo received a formal protest from President Roosevelt. Japan admitted responsibility for the attack, but stated they were not yet prepared for war and agreed to pay $2,247.36 in indemnity for deaths, injuries, and property loss. After the U.S. entered the war, regaining territory taken by Japan became a national priority. Before American troops ever engaged German soldiers in ground combat, U.S. Marines were already carrying out amphibious assaults on distant tropical islands, fighting Japanese occupiers who refused to surrender. By the summer of 1942, Japan had captured Wake, Bataan, Corregidor, and Guam, and taken thousands of Marines prisoner. However, things began to change on the battlefield for America. The goal of Operation Watchtower, America's first major offensive of World War II, was to occupy and defend Guadalcanal, Tulagi, Florida Islands, and the Santa Cruz Islands, to deny these areas to the enemy and to establish bases for future offensives. A colonel in the 1st Marine Division noted that this was the first offensive involving U.S. ground forces and expressed unwavering confidence in their success, saying that failure was not part of their vocabulary. Wearing camouflage helmet covers, the Marines descended cargo nets from transport ships into landing craft heading toward bombarded beaches. Lieutenant Kakashi Yoshimoto of the Japanese Special Naval Landing Force was dozing when a warning woke him. He rushed to the communication station before dawn and witnessed flashes at the port before being thrown by an explosion. A U.S. war correspondent called the landing at Guadalcanal a mammoth anticlimax with no initial combat. Major Ray Davis recalled landing unopposed. Only a few Japanese workers were present at the airfield, which was soon taken and named Henderson Field after Lofton Henderson, who was killed at Wake Island. But calm didn't last long. The Japanese launched attacks from land, air, and sea over the next 6 months. Davis described defending Henderson Field against aircraft using mechanical fire control, though they initially lacked the precision for high-altitude targets. As Japanese bombers increased their altitude, attacks became less effective. Health conditions for the Marines on Guadalcanal deteriorated quickly. Many suffered from malaria, diarrhea, and other illnesses. Davis himself endured malaria, hepatitis, and jaundice, though he managed to stay out of the hospital. According to medical records, 6,000 Marines were hospitalized in the first 3 months, mostly for malaria. The Japanese troops were relentless and effective jungle fighters. War correspondent Hanson W. Baldwin praised their bravery and aggression, noting they never stopped attacking until death. After a 6-month campaign, the Japanese were forced to abandon Guadalcanal. American losses included about 7,100 personnel, 29 ships, and 615 planes. The Japanese lost 683 planes, 38 ships, and 31,000 soldiers. Baldwin described the Japanese as a ruthless and dangerous foe, which proved true throughout the Pacific Campaign. Operation Watchtower also included the seizure of Tulagi, known as Operation Ringbolt. On August 7th, the 1st Marine Raider Battalion landed unopposed as the Japanese had expected a landing at the opposite end of the island. According to accounts, the raiders encountered fierce resistance shortly after advancing. Green flares signaled the Japanese counterattack. Raiders reported machine gun fire, sniper attacks from coconut trees, and booby traps. Despite this, they pushed forward. By afternoon, The raiders took control of key Japanese positions, including a golf clubhouse. They found food, uniforms, and personal belongings left behind. That night, they prepared for a counterattack. Ammunition and grenades were set within reach, machine guns were strategically placed, and a password containing the letter L was used to confuse the Japanese, who struggled to pronounce the letter. Around 11 p.m., Japanese forces launched a counterattack aimed at the center of the Marine position. Though it showed poor tactical judgment, the attacks were fierce. The Marines repelled 2 major assaults. Survivors reported how the remaining Japanese retreated by dawn. After mortar bombardments, organized resistance ended, and Tulagi was declared secure. However, the cost was high. 38 raiders were killed and 55 wounded. Of the estimated 350 Japanese defenders, only 3 survived. Fighting for control of the Solomon Islands continued through 1942 and into 1943. American forces eventually triumphed. But the campaign was bitter and costly. Operation Galvanic targeted the coral atolls of Tarawa and Betio. Major General Julian C. Smith led the 2nd Marine Division and noted that this operation would set the tone for all future campaigns in the Central Pacific. Anticipation back home was high. At 2,000 yards from shore, Japanese machine gun fire began striking the amphibious tractors carrying the Marines. Some landing craft hit coral reefs and Japanese anti-boat defenses. One coxswain panicked, dropped the ramp 800 yards from shore, and many Marines drowned in 15 feet of water under heavy loads. Tractors burned and exploded in the surf. Survivors took shelter behind a 5-foot coconut seawall. The initial landing plan failed. A radio man reported unusually strong resistance and 70% casualties. Although 2,000 Marines made it ashore, leadership fell to junior officers and enlisted men who rallied the troops to press forward. A civilian correspondent described the courage of the Marines, repeatedly attacking enemy positions despite intense fire, continuing until they were incapacitated. Tanks played a key role in the fight. Marine Shermans landed under heavy surf and battled Japanese armor. Their 75mm guns and machine guns helped offset the lack of artillery. During one engagement, a tank named China Gal and another Sherman destroyed several pillboxes before one was destroyed by enemy fire. By 1:30 p.m., the island was declared secure. On the 3rd day after the end of Operation Galvanic, the Japanese had lost more than 4,600 soldiers, while American forces suffered around 3,300 casualties, including those killed and wounded. The troops under General Smith had set a formidable standard. The goal of this joint Marine and Army operation was to capture the islands of Enewetak, Runit, and Kwajalein, the largest atoll in the world. The newly formed 4th Marine Division was assigned to Runit, while Kwajalein was given to the 7th Infantry Division. The Japanese beach defenses were lacking. There were no underwater obstacles or mines, but 3,000 well-equipped defenders were stationed on Runit. After 2 days of relentless naval and air bombardment, the 24th Marines attacked Runit, while the 23rd Marines landed on Roy. Progress on Roy was steady, though key enemy positions still had to be neutralized. The 2nd Battalion of the 23rd Marines encountered a heavily fortified blockhouse made of reinforced concrete, its walls 3 feet thick. Lieutenant Colonel Edward J. Dillon ordered Company G to ensure its complete destruction. Although partially damaged by naval gunfire, the steel door was still intact. A 75mm half-track hit it with 5 rounds. Then a demolition squad moved under cover, pushing Bangalore torpedoes through a shell hole in the roof and placing satchel charges near the gun ports. After pulling the igniters, the team fled. The resulting explosion killed 20 Marines and injured hundreds. Debris rained down, killing some who were in the open or far from the beach in small boats. An observation pilot reported that it seemed like the entire island had exploded. The blackened sky was filled with flying torpedo warheads and concrete. The explosion created a massive water-filled crater where the blockhouse had been. The Marines had unknowingly detonated a torpedo warhead magazine. 2 more bunkers exploded shortly afterward, reportedly triggered by Japanese defenders. The 2nd Battalion lost half its operational strength in these blasts. Still, within 48 hours, the Marines secured Roy, at the cost of 195 killed and 545 wounded, while inflicting 3,472 Japanese casualties and capturing 91. Saipan, Guam, and Tinian comprised the Forager campaign. Saipan's significance lay in its intended use as a base for B-29 bombers in the Pacific. The 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions led the invasion, preceded by 3 days of heavy naval and air bombardment. The 4th Marine Division landed on beaches designated Yellow 1 and 2 and Blue 1 and 2. The 2nd Marine Division landed on Red 1 and 2 and Green 1 and 2. 68 armored amphibians, equipped with 37mm and 75mm cannons, led the charge. Behind them, 4 waves of amphibious troop carriers followed in intervals. As the first wave neared the reef, there was no Japanese fire. Robert E. Wallen remembered colored flags sticking out of the sea as they passed. During the night before, the Japanese had positioned aiming stakes for their guns. When the Americans approached Roy, intense enemy fire erupted, making it impossible to use their 75mm howitzers effectively due to coral interference. Shells bounced unpredictably, often detonating mid-air or missing their targets entirely. Tokyo radio intercepts indicated panic as they described the Marines' amphibians as monster floating tanks. Explosions erupted near the shore. 2 Japanese soldiers suddenly appeared and ran inland, prompting hesitation and confusion. A moment later, Marines opened fire. Artillery continued bracketing their position, water splashing into the turrets. The Marines finally landed at 8:43. Lieutenant General Holland, "Howlin' Mad" Smith, later said all they could do was hold on. An amphibian nearby took a hit, and its hatch flapped wildly as if someone was trying to escape. Ammunition inside began to explode. One Marine described how their tank was hit, forcing them to abandon it and take shelter. Despite all efforts, the first day's objective, the 01 line, was not reached. Japanese defenders unleashed devastating fire, and the Marines were pinned to a narrow beachhead. A Japanese soldier later recalled how American forces advanced like a swarm of grasshoppers. First Lieutenant John C. Chapin described the scene of chaos: wrecked pillboxes, twisted bodies, burning vehicles, and the overpowering smell of explosives. As shells rained down every few seconds, one officer recalled digging into the sand using only his stomach, elbows, knees, and toes. The Marines fought fiercely for every inch. Smith later remarked that their beachhead was, at times, just a dozen yards deep. Artillery fire persisted for 20 minutes straight. Robert Sherrod, a war correspondent, reported that shells landed in the ocean, some 100 yards offshore, hitting tank traps meant to stop the enemy, but now used by the Marines themselves. At one aid station, several severely wounded men lay on the sand waiting for evacuation. 7 Marines were dead between 2 wrecked vehicles. Captain John A. McDear noted a fallen young private who had just arrived. His pocket contained a book titled, "Our Hearts Were Young and Gay." Over 2,000 men were killed during the landing, with 1,022 wounded. In the 2nd Marine Division alone, 553 were killed. 31 out of 68 amphibians were lost. 5 of the division's original infantry commanders were wounded. According to Smith, they couldn't declare the beachhead secured for another 3 days due to relentless pressure. In June 1944, during Operation Forager, Colonel E.A. Craig was walking near Asen Point Ridge with Captain George Percy when 2 Japanese soldiers emerged from a cave. One threw a satchel charge at Craig, who was blown into a ditch. The explosion caused severe bruising and temporary trauma. Nearby Marines opened fire, and a jeep with an anti-tank gun arrived and shelled the cave. The cave led to other areas in the hill, where several Japanese bodies were later found. Craig soon heard the sound of engines. Two Japanese tanks emerged from concealed positions, moving toward them while firing. A Marine with a bazooka and his assistant calmly advanced and destroyed both tanks. Then other Marines climbed the tanks and tossed grenades inside to finish off the crews. They later discovered two more camouflaged but abandoned tanks dug into the hillside. About 3,000 Americans were killed during the battle for Guam. Over 18,000 U.S. troops from the 1st Marine Division and the Army's 81st Infantry Division fought against 11,000 Japanese troops on the island of Peleliu from September to November 1944. The sky above the beach was soon dark with black smoke from burning amphibious tractors. The 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, led by Major Raymond Davis, pushed through shell fire. The Japanese had concentrated their heavy weapons between the reef and shore. Mortar rounds fell around the landing vehicles, and several caught fire. Davis was injured by a splinter from a mortar round, but returned to action quickly. His men were forced to fight their way off the beach, with Company A attempting to take shelter in an anti-tank trench. However, Japanese mortars from the front and anti-tank weapons from the left flank raked the position. Despite the dangers, Marines sought cover in the trench. While lying in all the attitudes of death, there were serious casualties and the company was completely stopped. The enemy had tunneled back under the Coral Ridge lines, sometimes 100 to 200 feet, and laid machine guns to shoot out of distant holes, creating deadly crossfire from well-dug-in fight-to-the-death defensive positions. Davis remembered that in retaliation, the Japanese ambushed a squad. According to the after-action report, Sergeant Robert W. Riley observed two amphibious tractors and a knocked-out Sherman tank on his left. To the right of the tank, he ordered his men to form a skirmish line and then used the tank's machine gun to open fire, severely wounding and pinning the enemy. When the company executive officer dispatched another tank, the squad was saved. By the time Riley returned, all the platoon's leaders had been killed or injured, so he was promoted to commander before being injured by grenade shrapnel. Riley led the 2nd Platoon through some of the campaign's most intense combat. The ranking Marine was given command of the platoon. Hogan, Gast, Harteen, and the 2nd Squad of the 1st Platoon, led by S.P.O. Mued, were able to storm Coral Ridge in front of them and proceed down the opposite side. Meanwhile, Sky and his men were busy dealing with the Japanese in their sector. After pushing back to the ridge behind them, they secured the left flank. After contacting Company 1 on their right, Scaperty successfully held the area he had taken until noon the next day by forming 4 distinct fire groups and maintaining visual contact across the 200 yards of ground. They repelled Japanese attempts to dislodge them during the night. Company B was committed to the offensive but met the same fate as Company A, which had been pinned down. According to his Navy Cross citation, Corporal Herbert B. Good boldly faced the intense barrage in an effort to outflank the Japanese and skillfully positioned his men for maximum effectiveness. He fearlessly led a determined attack, knowing his squad's firepower alone wouldn't suffice. Pressing forward with just grenades and a submachine gun, he managed to silence the hostile weapon and destroy its crew before being killed by enemy fire. Despite his bravery, Company B had to evacuate due to massive losses and questionable strategic value. The battle remains one of the most contentious of the war. 8 medals of honor were awarded for Peleliu, which had the highest casualty rate of any Pacific War engagement given the number of troops involved. Over 2,330 Americans were killed and 8,450 wounded. Only 202 Japanese survived. Many later argued the remote island should have been bypassed and left to wither. According to author S.E. Smith, Iwo Jima was even worse. Lieutenant General Holland Smith described it as the most savage and costly battle in Marine Corps history. It was the largest and most fortified position faced during World War II. William Manchester referred to it as a cold, smelly glob of lava in a surly sea. The necessity of attacking it stemmed from its strategic location. Miles of tunnels, gun emplacements, pillboxes, Bunkers, supply depots, command posts, hospitals, and housing had been built by Korean slave labor. There were 3 airfields, one under construction, which would serve as critical bombing bases for Japan. 6 battleships and 5 cruisers bombarded the island with 14,000 rounds of 14-inch and 8-inch shells in the most intense naval bombardment of the war to date. Reconnaissance Marines and Navy underwater demolition teams aboard 7 landing craft waited for the signal to advance. The boats roared forward at the signal. Scout sniper Art Linder observed the beach silhouette and terraces rising from the water, but had difficulty seeing due to the low vantage point. The 550-foot Mount Suribachi loomed over the landing beaches. Linder saw a massive explosion from a naval shell hit the mountain and noticed caverns that likely held Japanese weapons. 2 camouflaged landing craft with 20mm and 40mm guns passed Linder's boat, ready to assist the swimmers. 30,000 Marines came ashore, and the black lava sand turned red under heavy mortar and artillery fire. Lightly armored vehicles were quickly damaged. Within minutes, 3 were hit, and 9 of the 12 were rendered inoperable. The Marines and UDT swimmers found themselves exposed. Linder saw bullet splashes in the water, and evasive maneuvers began. A sergeant and corporal ran to the first pillbox, threw grenades, and the corporal emerged with a blood-soaked bayonet before he was killed on another pillbox. A patrol from Company E, 2nd Battalion, 28th Marines, captured Suribachi's summit and raised a small American flag at 8 a.m. on the 23rd. A larger flag was raised soon after. Joe Rosenthal, an Associated Press photographer, recalled tagging along and capturing the now iconic image of the second flag raising. He wasn't sure what he'd gotten until later. The photo went viral and led to persistent rumors of staging, which Rosenthal unintentionally confirmed due to a misunderstanding. But the battle didn't end with the flag raising. Over 19,000 Marines were wounded, and 6,821 lost their lives in the nearly 3-month-long fight to secure Iwo Jima. Few Japanese survived. Naval guns and carrier aircraft bombarded the island ahead of the landing. On April 1st at 7:45 a.m., Vice Admiral Richard K. Turner gave the command to land the force. The scene was one of organized chaos as troops descended cargo nets into hundreds of waiting boats. Amphibious tractors launched from larger ships, while motorboats darted around guiding waves toward shore. The 1,400 landing craft formed waves. At 8 o'clock, the signal was given, and the first armored tractors surged forward. According to the account in Victory in the Pacific by Major Charles S. Nichols, Jr. and Henry I. Shaw, Jr., amphibious tractors carrying troops advanced in 5 to 7 waves. A Japanese soldier watching the invasion described it as a frog awaiting a snake. On Mount Shuri, Japanese commanders silently observed the landing. Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, commander of Japan's 32nd Army, had spent months fortifying the summit and surrounding hills. He was awestruck by the bombardment's power and scale. To saturate the landing area with explosives, gunboats covered each 100-yard square with 25 rounds. The pre-landing bombardment included 22,500 mortar bombs, 33,000 rockets, and over 44,800 rounds of large-caliber shells. Gunboats pulled back as the assault vehicles moved in. The first wave landed at 8:39. Air observers reported no damage to the initial landing craft. There was little resistance at first. According to the 1st Marine Division's action report, troops pushed quickly inland. Journalist Robert Sherrod noted the surprising lack of opposition. Admiral Turner confirmed that the 10th Army troops landed without resistance on every beach. Morale was high, though intelligence warned of high expected casualties. Within the first hour, 16,000 combat troops landed. Yahara, a senior Japanese staff officer, wrote that the Americans did not suspect a trap. The Japanese had hidden in the heights around Kadena and Mount Shuri, planning to ambush them. The Americans successfully landed without initial difficulty. but the cost would come later. As many as 100,000 Japanese died, and between 14,000 and 20,000 Americans were killed by the end of the 82-day campaign. The war was nearing its end and had reached Japan's doorstep. The Marine Corps and Navy had spent 2 decades developing amphibious tactics that made island hopping possible. These tactics proved crucial to the campaign's success and ultimately led to Japan's defeat.